welcome to episode 452 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. I'm your writer, host, producer, Derek M. Cook, and it is week one of the Satanic Rites of January here on Monster Kid Radio. We are kicking off this 5-week event here on MKR by talking about one of my favorite Val Lewton films. That movie is The Seventh Victim. I'm going to be joined by friend of the show, returning guest, Kenneth Hite. Ken and I are going to talk about the Val Lewton film, and a number of other things are going to come up during that conversation. The song that you're hearing right now comes from the band The Wood Surfers. They are a surf band based out of Brazil. The song is called Psycho Nude. It is from their album, Wood Surfers. You can find them over at woodsurfersbrazil.bandcamp.com. Of course, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes so you can go and pick it up yourself when you're done listening to this episode of the podcast. Yeah, so like I said, Ken Hite is coming back to the show to talk about The Seventh Victim. There is something special about Val Lewton films, and I can't wait to get into this conversation with Ken. Well, I actually already had the conversation with Ken, so I can't wait for you to get into the conversation with Ken and I when we talk about this incredible film. Of course, we also have Professor Frenzy's Bedtime Stories, and Kenny has a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. That's all coming up. Before we get too much further into things, I'd like to let you know that this upcoming weekend will be the first appearance of myself and or Monster Kid Radio. I guess we're kind of a package deal. So Monster Kid Radio makes its first appearance of the year, its first live appearance at an event at Fandom PDX. You can find out more about Fandom PDX at fandompdx.com. Go to the guests page and, well, you'll see me there. Monster Kid Radio is a guest and or featured talent. I'm not exactly sure which category I'm in, but bottom line is I'm going to be at the event, and I'm going to be moderating a panel with friends of the show, Chris McMillan and David Heath. We're going to be talking about classic science fiction movies that still have something to say to modern audiences, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. So if you're going to be in the area at Fandom PDX, it's taking place here in Portland at the Sheridan Portland Airport Hotel, Saturday, Sunday. I'd love to see you. Event parking is free. Tickets at the door for a weekend pass is $35. Saturday only is $25. Sunday only is $20. Unfortunately, I don't know what day my panel is going to be on because that part of the schedule is still under construction. I know it's happening at 3 p.m. one of those days. Stay tuned to monsterkidradio.net or Monster Kid Radio on Facebook or Twitter, because as soon as I know something, you'll know something about what day we'll be doing the panel. I'm excited for this. Should be a good time. Just like the rest of this episode, which we're going to get to right about now.
This is your horror host, Mr. Lobo. Follow me, if you dare, into the old, dark house, a real haunted house that served as the location for the Chestburster Mystery House for Mr. Lobo's Cinema Insomnia Haunted House Special. In fact, the only way to survive this and to protect yourself from sheer madness is to put on your scaredy vision glasses, okay? Now, if mom or dad can't afford the scaredy vision glasses, that's okay. We won't judge you. All you need to do is put your hands over your face like this and peek through your fingers. And that should protect you from 40% of the terror. We've got our own group of paranoid investigators, or what I like to call real fake Ghostbusters, comprised entirely of horror movie host pals of mine. Dick Dizell, who was better known as Count Gordeval from Creature Feature. Jerry Moore, who is better known to the world as Carlos Borloff from Monster Madhouse. John Dimes, who is better known as Dr. Sarcophagi. And of course, Rich Kaz of Svengoolie fame. Let me say that one more time, of Svengoolie fame. Please come with us on this mystery. We weave through a whole bunch of weirdness, including cartoons and trailers and clips from horror movies. It's a level of strangeness not yet achieved in cinema. So go over to oldies.com and pick up Mr. Lobo's Cinema Insomnia Haunted House Special. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Out from the coldest and darkest regions of the sea, as old as time itself, comes the most terrifying monster the world has ever seen. The Sea Creature! Slithering over the face of the earth came a monster from beyond the stars. Inhuman, indestructible. Life on this planet was doomed when it conquered the world! These will be the strangest, most terrifying motion pictures you have ever seen. You will see monsters from a nightmare. The most horrifying creatures that ever made you wake up screaming. The She Creature! And it conquered the world!
Twins of Evil and Hands of the Ripper.
Double evil shock hits with the most fearsome females in horror history.
Twice the spine-chilling, heart-stopping terror.
Twins of Evil and Hands of the Ripper.
Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy, show. Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy, show.
Welcome to Professor Frenzy's Bedtime Stories, created especially for Monster Kid Radio. My name is Jerry Green. In this segment, I'm going to tell you a story from EC Horror Comics. Today's story is The Tunnel of Terror. It's from The Haunt of Fear, number 4, the November-December issue from 1950. It was written by Bill Gaines and Al Feldstein, and the art was by Jack Kamen. So sit back and relax while I tell this unappetizing tale. Linda Cross, a young single woman, took her troubled brother Paul to Mexico. She wanted him to get away from his friends and lifestyle of drinking and carousing that has seriously hurt his health and caused him to have a nervous breakdown. She returned to his room after shopping to find Paul gone. Where could he be? She searched high and low for him and finally went to the police station to see if they could help. They had no information on his whereabouts. A police officer rushed into the station and announced there was a dead man found at the nightclub, The Tunnel. He was an American that was found dead and partially devoured as if by a wild animal. Linda and the chief of police went to the club to see if the dead American was Paul. When they arrived, Linda saw the body and it was not Paul. Whew. Linda recognized the strange club as one that Paul might come to. She wanted to look around and was directed to a hatch in the floor that led to the real club. She descended the stairs and asked the maitre d' if he had seen Paul. He showed her some of the corpses they had on display as decoration at this club, nice club, and asked if any of these were her brother. They weren't. Just then, a horrible scream came from deep inside the tunnels. Another American had been killed and partially devoured. Linda ran to see who it was and found that it wasn't Paul either. Then she looked up, and deep in the darkness she spied her brother. Paul, it's me," she cried out, but he ran deeper into the darkness. Linda grabbed a torch and followed him. She finally found Paul and told him that he didn't have to run anymore. He was safe. Suddenly, he lunged at her and bit her hand. She realized he bit at her like a wild animal. Oh no, it's he who's been doing all of this killing. Linda's brother Paul is a fiendish cannibal killer, and he started to come towards her. The end. I hope you enjoyed that ghoulish story. This is an interesting one. For anyone that has any experience with EC horror stories, it was pretty clear early on that Paul was the cannibal, so there wasn't a big surprise twist ending this time. Paul did leave a pretty good trail of victims, which got a little repetitive, but seeing poor Linda pursuing the truth about her brother, even when we know what's going on, was entertaining. And what is it with EC horror and cannibalism? Jack Kamen's art is fantastic. Linda is gorgeous with reddish blonde hair and a wide-eyed, perplexed expression. Paul is a blonde, good-looking, all-American guy. His downfall would come as a surprise if this wasn't an EC book. The sequence where Linda realizes her brother has bitten her is fantastic. Her hand is at her forehead and her face is full of shadows. The next panel is a tight close-up of her face showing her horror. Great stuff. If you're interested in a copy of The Vault of Horror Volume 1, the book can be purchased on Amazon, and you can find a link to buy it on the MKR website. I hope you enjoyed the story. My name is Jerry Green, and you can listen to my podcast on the Frenzy feed. On Wednesday, we have the Professor Frenzy Show, where we talk about new indie comics, and on Monday, we have Memory Minute Monday, a nostalgia podcast. And on Sunday, listen to Frenzy Piece Theater, where we recap and discuss classic comic book stories. You can also catch me on Twitter at Professor Frenzy, and search for Professor Frenzy on YouTube, where you can find the Professor Frenzy Show and some exciting projects we have coming up. Stay tuned, and thanks for listening.
Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy show. Professor Frenzy, it's a show. Professor Frenzy show.
Join this safari into a green hell of horror in search of a secret fortune in diamonds and gold.
I want that money so bad that every time I close my eyes, I can see it.
Marla English, a woman possessed by a passion for wealth. Tom Conway, a man maddened by his lust for power. Tutch Connors, a white hunter entrapped by an adventuress's black heart. Lance Fuller, victimized by desire. Mary Ellen Kay, a blonde captive in the darkness of Voodoo Land.
Not man, not beast, but a combination of the best of each.
Voodoo Woman, an experience in terror that'll tear your nerves to shreds. Secrets torn from the earth as old as the earth, combining voodoo witchery with the most advanced of medical sciences to create before your very eyes Voodoo Woman. Voodoo Woman.
Across the centuries comes this exciting story of a modern girl cursed by an ancient legend. The legend of the cat people. Women whose kiss means death, whose love turns them into vicious, snarling beasts of prey.
Twice I've been followed by something that was not human, something that attempted to take my life. I believe that was the cat form of Irena.
Why should she wish to harm you?
Because I'm in love with her husband. It's shut now. Just a minute ago, it was open.
It's locked. Leave us, Irena.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today's film, The Seventh Victim, was never featured in FM, but one of its stars was mentioned. 1967 was a sad time for Monster Kids and pop culture fans, as 8 favorites passed away that year. Basil Rathbone, writer Charles Beaumont, Nelson Eddy, Misha Auer, Barbara Payton, Spencer Tracy, and Walt Disney were all featured in a joint obituary found in Famous Monsters 47 from September of 1967, together with today's male lead, Tom Conway. Here's what was said about him. Tom Conway, born in Russia, 15th September 1904, died 22nd of April 1967, made 280 movies during his 25-year acting career, including I Walked with a Zombie, She Creature, Voodoo Woman, 12 to the Moon, Seventh Victim, and The Cat People. Real name, Thomas Charles Sanders, brother of George Sanders. That is all for this edition of A Look at Famous Monsters. We will have more next week. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios and feliz año nuevo.
In 1972, American TV networks canceled 12 TV shows for crimes they didn't commit. These shows were promptly forgotten by the public and faded into obscurity. Today, Chris Cooling researches these shows for a podcast. If there's a TV show that no one else remembers, and if you have earbuds, maybe you can listen to Forgotten TV.
What was the mystery of the Crypt of the Living Dead?
This tomb must weigh 3 tons.
Don't. She's in there.
Crypt of the Living Dead.
Rated PG.
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Monster Kid Radio listeners, I have got a game designer, an author, a Lovecraft fan, a friend of mine, Kenneth Hite, here to join me to talk about a movie. Ken, welcome back to Monster Kid Radio.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Number 2, third time I become a beloved guest or a special guest or a recurring guest.
Ooh.
So I can't wait.
Well, I have to start thinking about a movie to have you back on, or a topic or something. But that's getting way ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about this week's movie.
Yes, let's do it.
A while back, you mentioned this film, The Seventh Victim, I think in passing at the Lovecraft Film Festival. I think it's probably where most of our movie conversations happen.
It's where most of our conversations happen, in fairness, Derek.
That's true. That's true. I occasionally see you at a different convention here and there, but yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And this one came up, and it's always been in the back of my mind because I love Val Lewton. I really love all of his films, especially his earlier work. I just adore. And this is one of the more offbeat ones, I feel like. And, you know, when I decided to do this themed month, I thought this is a great movie to pick. Are you overly familiar with this film? Is this something that you've been a fan of for a long time?
I grew up, as a Val Lewton fan without knowing I was a Val Lewton fan because I thought Cat People was the bomb. And then I discovered that there were more movies sort of like that. And I think they probably ran in rotation. But it wasn't until I got the box set of the Val Lewton films that Warner Brothers put out a little while ago. And they did a box set of all the Val Lewton horror movies. And I had seen, like I say, Cat People and Curse the Cat People. And I'd seen Leopard Man probably. And maybe I Walked with a Zombie. I want to say I may have seen that actually on the big screen in a revival at some point or other.
Nice.
And then it was watching the rest of them that I saw Seventh Victim. And when you just sort of come to Seventh Victim cold and you don't know anything about it, it plays, and I guess we'll get into it, as this sort of weird noir thing. And I'm watching it, and it just is pit after pit dropping out from under you because I've come to it completely cold. I have no idea what the theme of the movie is, what the movie's about. It just blew my mind. First of all, it's an amazing technical achievement. And second of all, for 1943, hell, for now, it is a remarkable philosophical statement to put in a movie. I'll say that. I guess we'll be spoilering it plenty later on, but that really impressed me. That hit me just right up the side of the head that someone would have the sheer guts to say that and then make a movie of that in 1943. Plus all of the other sort of great elements of it. And I just loved seeing Dr. Judd come back from Cat People. I thought that he was desperately missed by me anyway. I thought that he's a great oily hero villain. And it was lovely to see his earlier outing, I guess, chronologically in the Lewis Judd cycle.
Yeah, this is kind of sort of I don't know if it's a prequel per se, but it is the return of Dr. Judd, even though it happens before the Cat People because of what happens to Dr. Judd in Cat People, which, from what I understand, was not really the original intent. I don't know at what point the character became Dr. Judd, but I'm so glad he did because I love that character and I love Tom Conway. That guy, I've been watching a lot of the Falcon movies. I love him in those. I just am a big fan of this guy. And to see him in this and taking on a more, I don't know, active role on the side of good kind of was nice. I liked it. You know, for me with the Val Lewton films, I've seen this once before years ago. And it's one of those things where I saw it and I didn't really plug it into my brain as this is one of my favorite movies. But I recently rewatched it specifically for this recording. I watched it last night, in fact, and I was blown away. Val Lewton has this effect on me where whatever the most recent Val Lewton film I've seen, that one's my favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that effect that his movies have to put you in the moment of watching them, even if you're trying to watch it at a remove. Right? You can't half watch a Val Lewton film.
No.
Like I can freaking half watch Goodfellas, which is an amazing movie. And it can be just sort of playing, and then I'll turn my head and it's like, hey, Paul Sorvino, nice to see you. And then I go on with my business. But if Val Lewton starts, I'm in it. I'm there.
It just grabs you. You get lost in the shadows and you get lost in the camera composition and the story, the dialogue, the storytelling that's happening here. Val Lewton has a fairy tale-like way of wrapping his stories around you. There's just something about them that bring you in.
While also being very naturalistic. Because there's nothing sensationalistic about a Val Lewton film. They could be straight stories, and then you sort of reveal this sort of vertiginous drop philosophically or supernaturally, depending. More often A than B. The way that he directed his directors to direct, with very quiet, understated dialogue that no one, I think there's maybe one or two shouts in any given Val Lewton film. Mostly people are just talking in a normal voice, even on relatively important things, because that's how people normally do talk. It's not an actorly film in any way, although the acting is, of course, very important in it, but it's very naturalistic in that way. And certainly Seventh Victim is even the most so, because there's very little, even covertly supernatural in it.
Right. And even the one of the lead actresses, Kim Hunter, you know, her performance is so tamped down. It feels like a real person going through this as opposed to somebody performing these actions and going through the movements. And you watched the commentary track last night. I watched it this morning, and that's the commentary, and I forget his name off the top of my head. I'll look it up and drop it in the show notes later. He makes a point that she was told that as a stage actress, she needs to kind of tone it down because the film's going to blow everything up. So that choice really just kind of fit right in there, right in the sweet spot for that naturalistic kind of approach, but still somebody that is portraying and conveying these incredible emotions and stories to us. This movie, man, I'm getting a little tongue-tied because I enjoyed so many elements of it.
So when you sat back to rewatch this, were you like, well, this is Ken taking me on another stupid wild goose chase. I'll just do it to keep him happy. And then we're surprised by how good it was? Because the first time you saw it, had you registered it, or is it just like another Val Lewton to you, and then you were reminded by rewatching it? I'm kind of curious, because you obviously have a deep bench of horror experience.
So when I first saw this film, it was years ago, and it was before I had really kind of embraced this monster kid side of myself. So I knew it was Val Lewton. I knew Val Lewton was important in the history of the genre, and he was a solid filmmaker. It wasn't one that really kind of connected with me in the way like Cat People did, because, like you said, the supernatural elements are almost none. And it's like, it's a movie. It's Val Lewton. It looks good, but I want a monster. I want a zombie. I wanted something like that. This time when I watched it, I had forgotten the ending.
Oh my God. Go.
So yeah, I was pretty shocked. Now I loved the movie from start to finish. I really enjoyed it, and it wasn't just got to do another one with Ken. It was really a treat to revisit it. And then the ending hits me. I'm like, oh wow, that that is bleak. That is bleak, but so true.
It's an amazing accomplishment that Val Lewton wanted that, decided that was where the movie was going, sets it up, and then follows through and doesn't flinch, and is even forced, and this is just sheer luck of the draw, because of course it was shot longer and then they had to cut scenes out of it because it was no longer an A picture, that they don't have to put a capper on it. There's no part where anyone comes and reassures you that everything's going to be all right and that love will conquer all or any of that. That literally the last shot of the film is the ending, and there you go. Thank you for playing Welcome to Earth.
Yeah, I was at least expecting Dr. Judd to come up and say something. Somebody say something. Nope. The end.
Sorry. Thanks for watching, everybody. Yeah. Hope you feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I figured in the original ending, a shot Jason does sort of a little a capper speech while he stands at the feet of Dante and Beatrice, and is like, well, love will win out, but I personally will not. And that's how it is. If only I were Cyrano. And there we go, the end of the movie. And that would have, I don't say ruined it, because it still would have been a Val Lewton film, but it would have made it less of a hammer blow of a movie. And that movie depends, I think, a lot on the uncompromising nature of the story it tells. And I don't know if we're going to go into it. I don't know if we're going to spoiler it. I mean, people right now are, a quarter of the way into the podcast or whatever, and they don't know how it ends, maybe. What's our policy on this? I mean, it's from 1943. I feel like anyone should have seen it already. But the ending is so great.
The ending is great. So maybe let's avoid the specific actions of the end, but it is pretty boom, done.
Yeah.
Lights out. See ya.
Yeah.
Oh, it was really, really well done. It's one of those movies that when I watch a movie for the show, I'm constantly playing in my head, is this something my wife would enjoy? Because she doesn't go for, the big cheesy monster stuff that I go for. She doesn't go for the low budget stuff. I don't think I could show her any of the Bela Lugosi Monogram pictures, for example. I love those films. Well, and I love them, but I also know the issues. I could probably get away with showing her some of the Vincent Price films, that sort of thing. I think she would really like this one because it does engage different parts of me as a monster kid, as a film watcher, as a creative even. I mean, it does engage different parts, and I think it's something my wife would enjoy. So, I mean, that immediately elevates the film for me.
Yeah, well, obviously.
There's just a lot going on here just underneath the surface without feeling like there's a lot going on, which, we talk about Val Lewton being the guy behind it, but his director, Mark Robson, if not for him, I don't know if it would have worked the same way, because he was primarily an editor. So he was kind of, I can't imagine he couldn't help but shoot for the edit.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about Mark Robson is that he grew up being an editor, just like Jacques Tourneur had started out as an editor. And I think Val Lewton had I forget if Val had started out as an editor or not, or he always was a producer. But Robson was the editor on Cat People and on the other Tourneur films. And as the editor, he created the bus sequence in Cat People. He's the person who cut in the air brakes and caused that moment to work literally perfectly. So when people give Tourneur credit for the bus, they are correct to do so. Tourneur shoots the shot, he lines everything up, but the sting, the end, the capper, that was all Mark Robson. So Mark knew what he was doing, and that's why Val Lewton fought to have him on the picture. And when RKO literally said, we will raise your salary and increase the budget of your film, but you can't use Mark Robson, you have to use probably Edward Dmytryk or somebody else. And he said, nope, I promised this to Mark Robson. He's got a vision. I believe in it. We're going to finish it together. And then RKO was like, fine. And they take all that money and they give it to somebody else, and off they go. I mean, again, an RKO A picture was anybody else's B picture, let's be fair. But still, I mean, he just bought a house. He had costs, and he still gave it up to make the movie the way that he knew that he wanted to make the movie. And to give Mark Robson the shot as the director. So again, it's not like Val Lewton came in and redirected the shots or anything like that. It's not this sort of Howard Hawks Christian IB question. But Val Lewton apparently, and he would go through the screenplay one last time, and he would write very detailed notes about how he wanted shots to be and where the dissolve should be and things like that. So he is not directing, but he is a omnipresent force behind the directing. He didn't show up on set a lot, apparently, so he wasn't there nudging people. But I think if you're Mark Robson and you're going in to make your first movie, you know exactly how Mr. Lewton would like you to direct it, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah, especially having worked with him before. Yeah. And I love that Lewton's fingerprints are all over all the movies of his that I've seen.
Yeah.
You know, you can't help but feel Lewton's presence in Cat People, I Walk with a Zombie. I love The Leopard Man so much, and I can't help but feel Lewton just looming over all of that.
Yeah.
And you feel it in this too.
Mm-hmm. It's a very personal film to him because it takes place in Greenwich Village, where he and his wife had lived when he was just starting out. It's obviously a philosophical statement. Lewton was not a optimistic guy. I think we can say that. And so the movie tracks that question. And it's got a lot of stuff that I think Val Lewton really wanted to say on screen in it. And the location and a lot of the sort of literary high notes. I suspect the fact that the restaurant is called Dante's is Lewton's idea. The John Donne quote that opens and closes the film is definitely Lewton's. We know that he found it and made them put a title card on. And that element, and again, you don't want to give him just overwhelming credit. But again, when Mary is leaving the school and you hear them declining the French verbs, when she was going upstairs, they're declining amas, right? They're declining love in Latin. And then she comes down and they're declining rechercher, to search in French.
It's those little details.
Yeah. And all of that builds into the movie and you don't notice it. I mean, this is like, I don't even know how many times I've seen the movie, more than once, certainly. And then this last watching, not even the watching with the commentary track, the one that I did without the commentary track to nail the movie in my head, it has taken me forever to notice that Jacqueline's apartment is number 7.
Mm.
And she's just standing there next to the number 7 for beginning of that shot.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, yeah. It works so well because it's so natural. It has to be some number. And of course, it's number 7. And it's very, very good.
Yeah.
So much little things. And Lewton was very famously concerned with those details and thought that they made a movie and that they made a B movie and A movie regardless of the budget. And he was right. I mean, all of the elements, the set dressing, the costumes, all the stuff that you would cheap out on if you were a different producer, he did not.
Right. And that's something else that I really appreciate about what he did. I'd love to read some of his original screenplays. I don't know if there's anything out there in print available to read, but I would just love to read some of these things to see after he's added his notes, after he's done his pass, just to read them and see how much of it did dictate what we saw on the screen. The quotes that we see on the walls, the statues, the busts in some of the characters' offices, just all of that. I want to see how much of that came from Lewton himself and how much of it was, just set dressing.
Yeah.
There is a very literature heavy feel to a lot of his work anyway. A lot of callbacks to classic literature and, like you said, the quotes and even the slogan above the morgue. I don't know if that's really what I don't spend a lot of time outside morgues, so I don't know,
just the usual amount. Yeah.
Just even have something like that up there was...
Well, I guess if you go to a morgue and they don't have a terrifying Bible passage, you should get a different morgue.
I'll keep that in mind.
Right.
I'll keep that in mind. I'll put
when
that in
you're
my...
shopping around for a morgue, go by, do they have a terrifying Bible passage? That's important.
Very, very important. There's a lot to really kind of digest and dissect about this film. Before we get too far into it, though, Ken, there's something that we do on every episode of Monster Kid Radio, and I thought we'd do it again with you. We did it with you before. That's right. We've got the game, the Classic 5.
I love the game.
So for listeners who don't know, and I imagine pretty much everybody does at this point, but for any first-timers, the Classic 5 is a game that we play here on Monster Kid Radio. I have a deck of cards here. Each one of these cards has a this or that, which movie do you prefer style question. There are no right answers or wrong answers, really. And it's...
Right answers are the answers I give.
There we go. It's just a way to kind of talk more about monster movies with your fellow monster kids. Ken, are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Card number 1. Oh, what is your favorite Bela Lugosi film?
My favorite Bela Lugosi film is The Black Cat, the legendary, the magnificent Edgar G. Ulmer Black Cat. That movie is a surrealistic nightmare on every level. And just as the son of an architect, I love the fact that modernist architecture is the actual villain in the film. It's magnificent. I love that movie.
And fitting that it comes up this month.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I suppose that is true because it is the other Satan movie in this era.
Good stuff. All right, card number 2. Oh, I did not plan this. What is your favorite Karloff-Lugosi collaboration?
Well, now here we are.
Oh, no.
Having already said The Black Cat, I'm going to say The Black Cat, directed by Edgar G. Ulmer. I guess second place is going to be Son of Frankenstein.
20 years ago, in the barony of Frankenstein, a monster created by man stalked through the country, maiming and killing. In time, Frankenstein, maker of the monster, died. The monster disappeared. Now, after 20 years, the son of Frankenstein returns, and fear grips the village anew. A man tainted by the blood of his father can forget his human soul and carry on the diabolical work of the Frankenstein.
As a man, I should destroy him. But as a scientist, I should do everything in my power to bring him back to conscious life.
That's a movie that, again, I like a lot of it for the sets. And I think what I like best about that movie is the way that Basil Rathbone just seems so weirdly out of place in the Universal horror, which is odd because, I mean, they're all the same directors. It's all the same set. He's part of the big empire. But in my mind, he is so not in horror land. He's in Sherlock Holmes land or Robin Hood land that when he goes to Visaria or Transylvania and runs into the monster, it just boggles my mind. It's just endlessly fascinating to imagine that it's Basil Rathbone and no one told him he was making a Frankenstein movie until about halfway through. And he's like, what? And Bella is actually very good in Son of Frankenstein. I think people underrate him as an actor because they think of him as sort of this cheesy stage Dracula. And because Dracula itself is such a bad movie after the first act. And then he does sort of go into that death spiral with the heroin and the rest of it. But, you know, when he is doing his job, like he is in Black Cat and like he is in Son of Frankenstein, he's very good. And even through all the makeup, the Igor makeup, he's great. He's having a lot of fun with it, but he's not distracting you from the horror by over chewing the scenery. He's really playing exactly into the tone of that film. And so Son of Frankenstein is maybe a less than an ideally perfect movie, and it's unheralded certainly, and it really achieved its apotheosis when Mel Brooks remade it. But I think it's a pretty great movie, and it's a pretty great piece of work.
It's one of my favorites, so yeah, we're gonna get along just fine. Okay. Card number 3. What's your favorite classic horror or suspense TV series?
Classic horror or suspense TV show. Goodness me. I mean, I was a Twilight Zone kid. And if I'm answering this in honesty, I'm answering like 98% of everybody else. I had, with my paper route money, bought a tiny black and white TV that would fit on my bedside table. And I would go to bed and turn on the TV, and we would get the Twilight Zone on the UHF or whichever station it was, channel 34. And I could watch the Twilight Zone in bed on a tiny black and white TV, which is to say the way everyone watched it in 1950, whenever. So I very much imprinted on Twilight Zone when I was imprinting on Lovecraft and all of the other sort of adolescent horrors in my life. So I think I would have to go long and hard. I mean, I'm a big fan of a lot of them, and I like the ones that aren't overused just because they're not overused. So you get something like The Invaders is endlessly fascinating to me because I am coming to it as an adult and I'm looking at it sort of almost also as a historical document. But if you're talking just what gets me, it's Twilight Zone.
It's hard to go wrong with the Twilight Zone. It really is so many good episodes in that. And I'm a huge Night Gallery fan too, but yeah, it's really hard.
When they go color, it's something, they lose something, and not just Rod Serling loses control of the show, which also happened.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, it's true. All right, card number 4. What's your favorite Jekyll and Hyde movie?
I think it's probably the Frederick March one. I don't have really a favorite Jekyll and Hyde movie because I think they've all been done, and this may be structurally. You can't do Jekyll and Hyde the way that Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Jekyll and Hyde anymore because it's not a mystery. When Stevenson writes it as a mystery and people are reading it in 1887 or whenever it was, they're like, well, this is a fast, oh my goodness, who would have seen that coming? Well, now literally everyone sees that coming. And I know I say that, you know, you can't spoiler a great ending. You can't spoiler Othello is my standard example. But I feel like no one involved is making Jekyll and Hyde as a mystery. And so it's very hard to make it satisfying. So I think the Frederick March, but again, the Hammer Jekyll and Hyde is pretty great too. I don't like either of them so well that I would put them up against the other in a face-to-face battle. Mary Riley, which is not a good Jekyll and Hyde movie by any stretch, is the closest to a good Jekyll and Hyde movie that we've had, in the last half of the century, because it does do that mystery story. It tries to do it as sort of a young woman in peril horror movie, as opposed to a, oh my goodness, Jekyll is turning into Hyde, whatever will happen type movie.
I don't think I've seen Mary Riley. That's the Julia Roberts, isn't it?
Yeah. It at least tries. It makes the effort. It says, all right, everyone knows Jekyll and Hyde. Let's see if we can make a Jekyll and Hyde movie that people don't know and can then respond to fresh. And I think that Stevenson really kind of shot his own story in the foot there by being so amazingly good at it in the novel.
No Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde for you when it comes to
no
with Bernie Casey. Come on,
I admire what it was doing, but I think that it perhaps should have been left undone by those people.
Oh man, I'm fascinated. I know I love Blackula, and I know that was done kind of seriously, but like the Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde, Blackenstein, I love them probably for all the wrong reasons. But yeah, Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde, that's a movie. All right, final question. Who else could have or should have played a mad scientist?
Who else could have or should have? Let's see, back in the day. You know what? I'm going to say, in honor of our buddy Tom Conway in this film, his brother, George Saunders.
Ooh.
Who I think is such an oily reprobate, and I love seeing him in every film that he's in. George Saunders makes an entrance. I get to the point of the film another point. I just love George Saunders. And him as sort of a mad scientist could have really played up the amoral, louche, I'm just doing this to do this. It's sort of like Lawton in Island of Lost Souls, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because Lawton, I think, has some of that same, or maybe it's George Saunders has some of that Charles Lawton energy. But Lawton as Moreau is sort of just, I exist, nobody else exists, I'm just a sociopath, I'm just doing things. And I think Saunders could have done that, but with a sort of a smirk that would have made it, I'm making cat people, but you know why I'm doing it. Wink. And I think that George Saunders would have brought a level of sort of tangible goo, moral goo to the part if he'd been given, something where he's building people out of corpses or out of animals or experimenting on beautiful maidens. If George Saunders had just been showing up, and you start with him in a lecture hall condescending to everybody, that would have been a great opener.
Oh, yeah.
I just feel like every great George Saunders moment, if you replay it in your head and you think, he's got a brain in a jar somewhere, it just adds.
I like that. I will never be able to watch the early Falcon movies again now.
Right. The Falcon it's got a crime lab just like Doc Savage does, where he operates on people's brains.
I love it. With that 1940s science,
exactly.
Oh, that'd be great. All right, well, that was...
Nothing you can't do with a Van de Graaff generator and a Jacob's ladder, my friend. That's what science teaches us.
That's right. That's right. All right, well, that was the Classic Five. I feel sufficiently even more warmed up than before.
Right. We couldn't get warmer.
So let's talk about death. No.
Yes, let's talk about nihilistic death and ultimate pessimism, ultimate philosophical pessimism.
So while I'm watching this movie this time around, and it didn't occur to me the first time I saw it, because back then I wasn't really kind of in it the way that I have been since. When I'm watching it, I keep thinking, this would make a really interesting role-playing game scenario. And I'm seeing Mary as like the investigator, with the symbol and the cult and all this other stuff going on. And it has to be a Call of Cthulhu role-playing game scenario because of the ending. But but I'm thinking, I'm watching this, I'm like, and I'm talking with Ken about it because he's a game designer guy that one of the game designers I know. And interesting. Yeah, I really kind of liked that. And the fate of some of the characters throughout the film, like the guy who decides he's going to investigate what happened to the sister because he's curious.
And to get up the nose of the other private eye. I mean, that's one of the things that's great about this movie is no one does anything in this movie for unmixed motives.
Sure.
Right? I mean, Irvine August, yes, he takes pity on Mary. he wants to investigate and find out about her sister because she seems nice. And, but also he just wants to put a thumb in the nose of that other detective who warned him off at the beginning. And Mary, we're thinking, well, she's good. What could be gooder than finding your sister? But the way that she acts during the thing, especially where she basically urges poor Mr. August to his death by playing on his fear of being emasculated as a small man. And then her desire to find her sister is also maybe not pure and unmixed. And it begins, of course, because she's in financial trouble, not because she's ever cared enough to go visit her sister in New York. And so there's a lot of great sort of no one here is good or evil, despite the sort of facile dialogue that Dr. Judd spouts at the end about you've made the choice for evil. And it's like, well, Dr. Judd, you're one to talk, first of all.
I saw what you did in Cat People. I know better.
Well, first of all, I saw what you did in this movie. What is it with you and sleeping with your patients, Dr. Judd? No wonder you've stopped seeing people. Good Lord. You disgust me on every level. That's why it's so great that it's George Saunders' brother playing you. And even our buddy, the poet Jason, who is as close to a moral figure, I think, as you get in the movie. And even he is like driven by love, but he's too weak to get the love that he deserves. Ward obviously is a duplicitous weasel. Not only is he a lawyer, but he like, oh, I didn't ever tell you that I was married to your sister. I wonder why that slipped my mind. Oh, I know why it slipped your mind, Hugh Beaumont, you scumbag.
I wonder. Yeah.
So it's a lot of levels of care. And again, for a 71-minute B picture that no one except Val Lewton would have cared if everyone had been standard, if everyone had been normal, if it had just been, I'm looking for my sister and I'm nice. But Lewton doesn't want that to be the movie, because then the philosophical point of the movie, it becomes, oh, isn't Jacqueline a freak? As opposed to Jacqueline's just at the end of everybody's rope. We're all going to that room. And there's just so much dimensionality to the people that the movie just, again, leaps off the screen at you. I forget what brought that up, why I went on that tear, but I think it's a valuable
I think
tear.
so too. I think there's, if the characters were a little bit more cookie cutter or less dimensional than they are, we wouldn't be able to have the philosophical discussions about what's really being said here and what we can really take away from the film that we do now. If Mary was just, I'm going to go find my sister. Oh, it doesn't give you a chance to kind of really dive in and explore just what the heck was she thinking when she was telling the poor investigator, oh, I don't know, it's awfully dark. Maybe you should go. No, what are you doing?
You could just go down to the end of the hall. Right. And it's such a good scene because it also demonstrates that she is an intelligent person who uses a tool as a tool. And again, that's maybe not a good thing to be, but she's not just a fainting nonentity. She's not just the person who's sort of shoved around by the men in the movie. And of course, when Gregory Ward tries to boss her around about drinking her milk, and she, snaps back at him. She's like, don't tell me what to do. And that sort of level of individuality, that's all the characters in the movie share that. They're like, I'm going to decide, not you. I'm going to decide whether I'm a poet. I'm going to decide whether I should sleep with my patients, I guess. Everyone's making their own sorts of choices. And of course, the movie does not present that as an unmixed good either. It's a really morally complex film. Again, given that it's an RKO B picture that was supposed to just be about murdering. They gave him the title. They said that your next movie is called The Seventh Victim. Go make it. And he makes this instead and it's an amazing
in spite thing. Of. Yeah, he was given just a handful of titles. Right, Here, go do this. And I don't know, do you listen to the Secret History of Hollywood podcast?
I do not, Derek. As you know, I consider podcasts a degenerate art form.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Nothing to do with them.
Yeah, me too. But I would make an exception for the Secret History of Hollywood. He does two different podcasts, but the one specific one I'm referring to, and I'll send you a link, and I'll put a link in the show notes as well. He does long form deep dives into Hollywood history, and he does it in a very entertaining narrative way. And he has either just wrapped or is wrapping up a long series about Val Lewton.
Cool.
And
Val Lewton deserves it.
Yeah, it's really good. I've learned so much about Val Lewton.
Do you want to hear my ridiculous theory that so far no one has been able to tell me I'm wrong?
Sure, okay.
The closest thing to Val Lewton that we have today is Kevin Feige.
Oh, okay.
In that he is a producer who puts his absolute stamp on a film when he makes it. It is a very rare director that can get out of the Kevin Feige box, that he is producing towards a personal vision, namely of the Marvel comics that he read in the late 80s and early 90s. He is basically being given his head by a studio because he's making money, and so they won't pay attention as long as he keeps doing it. He's very like Val Lewton, and you would have to, I think, look all the way back to Howard Hawks for another producer who is as important in the creative output as you have with Val Lewton or with Kevin Feige.
Yeah, I'd say maybe somebody like Spielberg, but he's also a director, so he doesn't just, but as somebody who is just strictly a producer. Wow, I had not considered that. When you first said it, I don't know if I hit mute or not fast enough, but I started laughing. Because I was just like the superhero guy, which I love those movies too, don't get me wrong, but no, you're absolutely right. I mean, don't think about the genre, think about the personal stamp he puts on there. You're spot on. I agree with you, sir.
I'm a Marvel cinematic guy, like everybody is a Marvel cinematic. I am not standing up on my soapbox. Scorsese is right, but you don't have to be mean about it. But are people in 80 years going to be doing podcasts about Thor: The Dark World? I don't think so.
What's a podcast?
Yeah, exactly. Right. No. they'll be doing nasal downloads or whatever they have then. But Val Lewton is making stuff that it has withstood the test of time and only gotten better as a result of people looking at it. I think so too. I don't know that that's going to be the same, even of the great Kevin Feige, who I give all the credit for the Marvel Universe. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, back to Val Lewton, away from my crazy notion.
No, I think that's a really solid comparison. Howard Hawks, Val Lewton, Kevin Feige. I can't think of anybody else who was just strictly a producer.
And Hawks obviously was a director as well, so he barely belongs in it, but his production stamp is so strong, is why I was thinking about him.
No, Val Lewton had done a superhero movie. No. Don't want to see that.
Yeah.
No, Val Lewton's work, I think, is probably, of the three that we just mentioned, I'd say he's probably the most singular vision that I can feel. This is a Val Lewton film.
Yeah.
And like I said, the podcast that I've been listening to is amazing. If you want to learn more about Val Lewton, listeners, I'll direct you over there. The producer of the show is a great guy and does a lot of hard work. The Seventh Victim itself, this film, we talk a little bit about how it starts. She goes off on a journey to find her sister, not because she misses her sister or she's getting returned mail, but because the checks to pay for her school stopped coming.
Mm-hmm.
And even that feels a little, she loves her sister, I get it, but how do you not know she's not been sending these checks for how long has it been going on
6 months.
Right.
6 months that no one has heard from her sister.
So she goes on this journey to find her in New York, and we discover and meet all these other amazingly complex characters. The poet that you mentioned, Jason, Dr. Judd, of course, Tom Conway is just fantastic. Hugh Beaumont.
Yes.
Playing Ward.
Playing the other Ward.
Not Ward Cleaver.
Not Ward
the
Cleaver,
other Ward.
But still playing Ward. Except, if Ward Cleaver was out there sniffing around when Mrs. Cleaver took ill.
I really liked him in this. I get a kick out of seeing people like Hugh Beaumont or the guy who played the professor in Gilligan's Island, Russell
Johnson.
Yeah, I get a kick out of seeing these guys who did these campy, sitcom-y type shows in more serious productions. So seeing Hugh Beaumont in this, he's actually acting. I mean, he's not the Beaver's dad.
No.
And there are a few times in this film, a few shots where I had to double take because I thought, well, is that even him? It doesn't even look like Beaver's dad, but of course it is. Mm-hmm. He just really kind of sunk into that character of Gregory Ward, who conveniently forgets to mention that he's married when he meets the pretty girl.
Yeah, and he has no good explanation. I mean, he tries. And one of the fun things about this movie is that because the movie was chopped up, there are things that maybe it would have been made more clear if we'd seen the longer version, but I think that would have made it a worse movie, because Gregory Ward having this sort of weirdly reclusive part of his past, the fact that we can't really, even at the end of the movie, put together a timeline of exactly what happened to Jacqueline, all of that is very real feeling. I mean, if you've ever seen a true crime show, you don't know anything about someone once they sort of go off the board and they start having adventures that lead you to be on a true crime show. And no one ever knows everything. And they're sort of, well, this is our best guess. And you have that same sort of response to this, but it's not all tied up neatly. And even Gregory Ward's romantic feelings for Mary, well, it's a absolutely conventional through line that one assumes had to be in the movie. It's left with this sort of weird, echoey bit in it. And you just have to wonder that, sure, they like each other now, but in 2 years when the pheromones have worn off, is she going to say, hey, about my sister? What exactly were you doing?
Yeah, right. I never got the impression that he was completely divorced from the group of Satanists, basically. I always got the impression that he knows a lot more than he's letting on, and he's not going to tell Mary at all.
Right. Yeah. He just doesn't want her to be involved in any of it. And again, that's because I think that if you're going to maybe start investing this movie with a little more gravity, but again, the movie backs you up if you do, that he's a little ashamed of New York and of his life. And he sort of pals around with Dr. Judd more as a, well, at least I'm not this bad sort of way, right? I'm not completely contemptible, but I am paying Dr. Judd basically blackmail money to keep my wife hidden. That's what's going on. And it's just that scene with the two of them in the office. And these are two of the ostensible heroes of the film, right? These are the good guys doing that. That's just disgusting. And so for Ward, I think everyone in this movie has this sort of weird connection, and only the lovely Italian couple that run Dante's are sort of immune from the awfulness of New York City, that everything else in New York City is sort of being indicted as well. It's very much that noir urban nightscape. Once you're off the sidewalk, you are out of the decency. You're not living in the suburbs like a nice person should. Although this is before suburbs, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. The restaurant seems to be like a safe space, and that's about it.
And even that, of course, it's named Dante's. So
right.
At no time are you ever thinking, oh, the Dante's, that's a name that doesn't have any weird, horrible connotations. And even though the paintings are Dante and Beatrice, it's still, well, we are on the pit of hell. We know that. We're on the lip of hell. That's happening. So it's even the freaking lovely Italian people who, by the way, will break into their tenant's apartment, are not quite immune from what's going on. And when the woman who runs the restaurant brings Jason over to the table of Mary and Ward, she knows would have to know that Jacqueline, because she said she saw him brought in on a limousine with a rich man, and that probably that was Ward. And so she has to know something's up. And so she's bringing Jason over as this third wheel to try and ruin their dinner, although she passes it off and saying, oh, you make them laugh with your funny poetry and your failure. And then there's a lot of good stuff going on in that movie. And the notion that everyone hates the city and doesn't want any part of it, that's conventionally noir. But at the beginning, when she's leaving Highcliffe, the literal place of sanctity, and Gilchrist says, oh, don't come back. Don't come back here. This place is a crypt. This is a mausoleum. You can't come back. You have to live. And that's a great moment, even though it's weirdly counter to what actually the movie is about. But the notion that there is no safe place in the world, there is no good place in the world. The instant you pay attention to what's going on, you're screwed. It's a great thing about the movie.
Yes, as soon as you realize what's happening, you rent a room above a hotel and string up a noose.
Yep. Get yourself a room with a chair and a noose.
Yep. What did you think about the shower scene?
It's kind of amazing. It's obviously something that Alfred Hitchcock watched before Psycho.
Yeah, Hitchcock or Block. Somebody had to have seen it. It's a really interesting precursor to Psycho. Nobody gets killed in the shower. I mean, spoiler. I played the spoiler warning at the beginning.
But somebody gets threatened.
So, and it's Mary's response to that is very kind of low key. I personally probably would be freaking out if some woman that does not live in my building
showed up, sort of threatening you in the shower.
Yeah, while you're showering, she just starts barking these threats at you.
Yeah, it's quite a thing.
It was fascinating to watch, knowing, the history of shower scenes with Psycho and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, this really is potentially the precursor to all that. And again, all props to Val Lewton.
Yeah, and the way that it tells you a lot about Esther Reddy, I mean, obviously it also tells you about Mary, because she, doesn't back down. She's frightened, but she's not put off her course. Mm-hmm. And again, in most movies, the good guy gets threatened and then continues, and it's pro forma. In this, you feel like it's a real scene that really matters. But it portrays Reddy as this sort of person who just feels totally entitled.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I want a cosmetics company. I'm going to take it. I want to walk into the shower and bully someone. I'll do that. And that sort of level of, I don't want to say dominance, but I want to say self-aggrandizement that is, as we discover, sort of core to the palladist movement. And to have it brought out with Miss Reddy, I think that's a strong way to put those notes in, that sense of, I own this. I'm entitled to it. I should take it.
It's a very strong sense of, like you said, entitlement. This kind of, she's protected or enabled by whatever it is that she and her group do. The palladist movement, is that a real thing? I don't know.
Well, real is a strong word.
Okay.
There was, in fact, a Masonic movement called the Palladist Society.
Okay.
In the 1890s, a crusading journalist, if that is the word I want, and I probably want neither of those words, launched a expose of the Satan movement within the Catholic Church, saying a true expose of the Palladists. And he had a woman named Diana Vaughn, who was supposed to have been a real-life Palladist who was victimized and had reformed. There was going to be a big presentation where she would tell her story. So all the press in France is there. And he gets up and he says, "Ha, I ran a scam on you. There's no such thing." And then no further questions. And that was a giant sensation and put the phrase Palladist into people's heads. So the notion is that the Palladists are a sort of theistic Satanist movement. They believe in both God and the devil, and that they've picked, which is what they are in the film. And that notion exists. It's out there in the sort of meme stream. And if you're a scriptwriter doing research into Satanists, maybe you run across Leo Taxil's book, or maybe you run across a popularization of one of Leo Taxil's books, and you say, Palladist, that's a good name. And apparently the screenwriter, because there was two screenwriters, there was Bodine and there was
Charles O'Neill.
O'Neill, right.
Mm-hmm.
And Bodine apparently gets a telegram or a letter from Val Lewton that says, your first draft is terrible. We're not using it. We're using a different draft. You're working with Charles O'Neill. Oh, and by the way, see if you can get to any Satanist meetings. Which is the sort of letter we all dreamed of getting from our boss, by the way. And so he goes to RKO in New York and says, Val Lewton just said I should go to Satanist meetings. And then they all laughed at him. And then one of them said, oh, you know what? I think I know of a Satanist group on the West Side. Let me put you in touch. Because that's apparently how life worked in 1943. He would just go to Rolodex under S. And so maybe the real life Satanist group that he went and hung out with briefly were also calling themselves Palladists after the Leo Taxil expose, quote unquote.
And you forever remember which executive is like, oh, hey, I know somebody, because you never want to go out to lunch with him again.
Right. Yeah. It's like, you certainly don't want to leave your wife with them, apparently. That's a lesson that we've learned. And Bodine says that the real life Satanists were just nice old people who knitted and crocheted and cast spells against Hitler. And that's what they were doing at the meeting that he was there. And and later on, much later, he's recalling it. He says it's much like the group in Rosemary's Baby, that they're just nice old people on the West Side, but they're also, Satanists. And they're casting spells against Hitler because apparently Hitler was a different kind of I don't know, whatever. They were Satanists, but that doesn't mean they hold with Nazism. So good for them, I guess.
Yeah, it's they're good. See, I don't know. Yeah,
whatever. We can't be parsing that at this stage of the game.
Well, yeah, and in this film, I mean, the questions of good versus evil, I think, are pretty vague. Anyway, yeah, they're trying to convince her to kill herself, but they're not going to do it themselves because they don't believe in violence. So
because of our strangely contradictory bylaws, I think they even say that when our founder wrote the strangely contradictory code of our order. And by the way, how come Ben Bard isn't in everything? As Mr. Brune, the chief paladist, he's so good.
Oh, he's great.
He's like Magic Bogart.
He's great.
Even in that last sort of not particularly great scene where they feel bad because Dr. Judd of all people says the Lord's Prayer.
Right.
By the way, how Dr. Judd does that without his tongue blackening in his throat, I'll never know. But that great underlighting where he's standing there saying, "Who knows what is wrong or right? If I prefer to believe in satanic majesty and power, who can deny me?" And he's got that cool underlighting, and you're like, man, I want to see a series of Mr. Brune movies now where he goes out and messes with people.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
And it's so good.
He was easily one of my favorite characters in this, even though he's not in it very much, just because you're just drawn to him. He's just got this presence and this delivery, this way of being on screen. As far as the rest of the movement, the group goes, they're not doing anything quote unquote evil per se, I suppose. I mean, outside of the, hey, you got to kill yourself, but
right,
which isn't really good.
They then send some to stab Jacqueline.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
when
they
she
do
doesn't
send
kill herself.
Yeah, they do send a guy after her. Yeah. Which again, I thought you weren't supposed to be violent, but okay, as long as you're not doing it, I guess.
Yeah, they just hired a guy.
Which that sequence is so well done. That's where the Lewton bus is in this sequence here. You watch a Val Lewton film now and you look for the Lewton bus, or you listen for it, inspired by the cat people scene that makes me jump every single time, even though I know it's coming.
Yep.
So the Lewton bus scene happens in here.
And he puts the bus in so early that you're like, oh, okay, that was our bus moment. And it's like, nah, you just think that was your bus moment.
Right. It's like, well, that's going to be a short scene. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah.
Wait a minute. Yeah, that's a good walk. Again, the great scene where she's in the crowded streets and no one can talk to her and she can't talk to anyone, that we saw sort of prefigured with Mary in the subway, where there's just the drunks and the sleeping guys, and then the conductor doesn't believe her. So we have that sort of the subway's not safe, the streets aren't safe, nowhere is safe.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier too about how the city itself is just, once it gets you, it's got you. You're done. And that's even pretty much spelled out by Dr. Judd when he explains that Jacqueline has spent so much time inside she can't stand the streets.
Right. Yeah. That she's so nervous, and it's like,
yeah.
The thing is, of course, anything that Judd says is like instantly dubious.
Yeah, like, that's true.
Are you saying that you've got her hooked on pills? Is that what you're actually saying, Dr. Judd? Is this, or is this just an excuse you give as to why you can't take her to parties? So, she doesn't like the streets. I keep my mistress locked in a building that only I know where it is.
Yeah.
Because she hates the streets so much. But again, it's within the line of what we see about Jacqueline. So it's not that he's automatically lying; it's that he's probably might be lying,
right.
And it's a great element in the story. And then certainly when she does go on the streets, she is very nervous. But this is because she knows someone's coming to kill her. So it's a fascinating story. And then when we sort of see the future of Jacqueline when she meets Mimi in the hall, and Mimi's like, "I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being scared of death. I'm going to go out into the streets." And it's like, right? Oh my God, Mimi.
Don't you know what's coming for you?
Right. Exactly. It's such a bit. And again, I think that was a last minute Lewton ad that he just says, we got to use the cat people lady again.
Well, she was great. I mean, he does use a few people a couple of times. Jane Brooks, Jacqueline, she was in something else. Even Mr. Brune, Ben Bard was in something else. It was in The Leopard Man.
Right.
But the Mimi character, we did see her earlier in the movie at the very beginning when they get to that house or to that home. She's like a neighboring tenant, and we hear her kind of coughing and hacking up.
Yep.
So something's a little wrong, and she even gets a look or two cast her way, but that's it. So it's a nice little seeding of what we're going to have at the end.
And that she's in room 8 sort of tells you what's going to happen to her. So
yeah, the sequel, The Eighth Victim, where she's just out partying all day. Yeah.
Yep. She's a victim of tuberculosis and poverty and Satanists.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I don't know which order,
It's such a story. It's such a movie.
It's a great film. I don't know how much more we can talk about the ending without really ruining or spoiling the ending. I don't want to spoil it. If listeners have not seen this film, be prepared. It's amazing.
Yeah, so good. And so true, right? It's like I said, one of the great things about the sort of paraclimax where Jason and Judd go to the Satanist meeting and say, you are bad people, and that you're little pathetic cowards, which is closer to true. And then they stalk off and they're like, I guess we are. And that sort of doesn't ring. And you're like, well, if that's our ending, I feel angry. And then the ending happens. And you're like, okay, I forgive you again, Val Lewton. This was one last sort of curlicue of conventional morality before the end of the movie happens.
Yeah, there is this shift in character point of view, and point of view of the film, really. Because for most of the movie, we're following Mary and what's going on with her, trying to find Jacqueline. But at that point, we do shift, or before that even, we do shift to Jacqueline's point of view and how she views what's happening around her in the world and what her place is or isn't in it. And normally I have problems with like these weird point of view changes that just kind of come out of the blue, but this felt right. Mary's story was done. It's now, let's go wrap up Jacqueline.
Yeah, the movie's about Jacqueline in the same way that Laura is about Laura, I guess. And then we have that moment where we find Jacqueline. We have the weird opener where she does the silence and then runs away, and then we see her again, and then we're in the room with her. We see her being hectored over the poison. We find out a little more about her relationship maybe with Francis, and then she does the great Lewton walk. So it's not quite midway through the movie, but it's maybe 2/3 of the way through the movie that we do make that switch. But like you say, part of it is because the characters are so well doubled for each other, right? That maybe we're at a point in the movie where now that Mary has been ensnared by Mr. Gregory Ward and fallen in love with the city and gotten the job and is going to be part of this cycle, we just flip over to Mary's future / darker / more aware self. And so we are seeing the same viewpoint, the person who quests and then finds, and then what happens after you find. Right? That Mary and Jacqueline are sort of in that way the same character, in the same way that like Jason and Judd and Ward are all sort of aspects of the same male character, right? That you can be weak and feckless, you can be disgusting and rational, or you can be halfway in between, like Hugh Beaumont.
Yeah. And I think that sums up the movie. I mean, almost everything about the movie. It really, I don't know what else to say here. We've been talking for over an hour now about this film, and I feel like left unchecked, we could probably talk for a few hours more.
Yeah,
but
because it's a masterpiece. That's
it
how
really
you
is.
Can do it. And there's so many things we have barely even touched on, like just the awesomeness of library detective work by a poet.
Again, it goes back to that whole investigation thing. That's why I thought, hey, Call of Cthulhu role-playing game scenario.
Very much, very strong.
We go hit the books. We go to the library. We investigate. We research. We don't go in guns blazing.
Yeah, it's just and there is a gigantic lesbian subtext that we have left pretty much undiscussed, but is another very major part of the film as shot. Again, you can, I guess, go back and forth as to whether or not Val Lewton meant it to be there, but I think we have established that if something's in a Val Lewton film, he probably meant it to be there. So,
if I remember right, I believe his aunt may have been a lesbian, or a grandma, a relative
again,
was.
He lived in Greenwich Village. It's not like he was, not knowing lesbians at the time. Right. And then he went to Hollywood, where again there was ample opportunity to meet them and portray them in sympathetic ways, as opposed to as code for evil.
Right.
The way that,
exactly.
say, Dracula's daughter does. But this is a more nuanced story. First of all, because everyone is horrible. But second of all, because it's not that simple. It's not just that, she's a lesbian, therefore she's bad. It's like, well, there's a lot going on. And that lesbianism is just the same as heterosexual romantic love, and that is doomed and terrible.
I mean, you can even see some of that in Cat People. You know, you can see some of that here. And like you said, if it's in a Val Lewton film, it wasn't an accident.
Right. He meant to be there. We haven't talked about the Roy Webb score, which is surprisingly good. I mean, I say surprisingly, that's unfair, but it is. It's surprisingly good, and it stops when it needs to, which is another weird thing. I guess that happened a lot more in the 30s and 40s than it does now anyway, but it is a weird thing where it's like, nope, we're now about footstep.
Well, and it adds.
I'm going to listen to your music, Roy Webb. Keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, it adds to the suspense, right? I mean, the producer, the director, the editor, all of them knew when to let the music go and when to pull it away. And what Roy Webb does, Roy did most of Lewton's films, didn't he?
Yeah, it looks like he did. This is just Wikipedia answering, not Ken. But it looks like he did Cat People. He did I Walked with a Zombie, Leopard Man. I'm not looking at all of them. He did a ton of stuff for RKO because there's a bunch of Falcon movies in there. I suspect he was like the RKO, one of their house composers. And you were lucky enough to get Roy Webb if you were Val Lewton. And then, again, I assume Val and Webb had ideas and discussions. And Lewton was like, for this one, everything should be sort of dissonant minor key chords. Don't play any romantic strings. If I hear a romantic violin swell, I will come punch you. And so Roy Webb is like, you got it, boss. Music that you hate. Ready to go.
It's good stuff. I think there has been a release of some of his music on CD. I'd have to double check, but if you haven't listened to Roy Webb's music just by itself, listeners, I recommend it because it's really good. It's in places it's beautiful, in other places it's like, making you feel uncomfortable. It's a guy that we don't talk enough about. I feel like when we talk about classic horror composers, we always go to like the Salters or the Steins. Roy Webb, right up there. Great stuff.
Good stuff.
Really good stuff. So there's tons more to talk about, and I'm sure at some point in the future, you and I will meet in person again, and this will come up again, because how can you not talk about this film?
Absolutely. This is one of those films that once it's in you want other people to have seen it and to love it and to appreciate it for the just remarkable document that it is. And again, this is not to say this is a better film than Casablanca.
No.
But you absolutely understand how Casablanca could be made in 1942, right?
Sure.
Casablanca comes up. Yes, I get it. Everything about this movie is an understandable decision. It's in line with Hollywood of the era. It completely makes sense. Once you've gotten past the notion that people believe Humphrey Bogart is a romantic lead, you can buy anything. The Casablanca is a very conventional film. Seventh Victim is remarkable because it is so unconventional.
Yeah, it's definitely not.
Everything that it does and everything that it's about and all the things we've talked about character and music and set design are so not what you would expect out of Hollywood in 1943, out of an A picture in 1943, much less an RKO B backlot. It's a singular expression of a creator, which is not something that you see very often in movies. Movies at their best are collaborations between a lot of creators, and at their worst are horrible committee-made melange. But this is a thing that is working very much against the grain of Hollywood and against the strain of Hollywood. And I don't think you could maybe make it now in Hollywood, much less, again, 1943. So it's a remarkable achievement. And again, it's not a better film than Casablanca, but it is a harder film to have made and to have made nearly perfectly than Casablanca was.
At the beginning of this, I said that with Val Lewton, the most recent Val Lewton film I've seen is typically my favorite at that time. Mm-hmm. And there may be another movie that I watch by Val Lewton and say, hey, that's my favorite now. But I don't think there will be another time when I'm watching a Val Lewton film and I'm not affected the same way.
Yeah.
I think this movie is probably the most affecting of the Val Lewton films that I've seen. And I'm going to be mulling it over.
And weirdly, I think a lot of that is because there's no supernatural element or a very small one.
Right.
And so you can't just say, well, yeah, in the world of cat people, that could happen. But in our world, I know that love is good. And it's like, no, this is our world, and love is not good. Nothing is good. Everything is terrible. Get yourself a room with a noose.
That's a great way to end this conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, man, Ken, this has been a blast. I need to have you on more often because it's just fun to chat with you, man.
I am down with that, man. You are the master, and you're terrific, and I love being on the show.
So how do people find you? Do you still do the podcast with Robin?
I still do the podcast with Robin. Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff drops every Friday at KenandRobinTalkAboutStuff.com or wherever you hunt your podcasts down. We are on all of them. Please rate, back us on the Patreon if you've got extra money sloshing around. And then also I'm on the Twitters at Kenneth Hite and on the Facebooks. It's harder to follow someone on Facebook because of the algorithm, but if you work very, very hard, you will never miss a single golden syllable of my social media output.
Because this episode's coming out in January, is there anything in early 2020 book-wise or game-wise people can look forward to?
I believe in January you will hopefully be looking forward to and being tantalized and titillated with Promises of Hellenistica, which should be kickstarting in the first part of 2020. So Hellenistica 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons compatible setting, set in the good parts version of the 3rd century BC. Elephants, cat people, flying triremes, giant mechanical men, skeleton. I mean, you're listening to this podcast, you've seen Jason and the Argonauts, you have it imprinted on your corneas. Jason and the Argonauts, the movie, the role-playing game. Call it that.
Oh, that's awesome. If the Kickstarter campaign has launched by the time this episode goes out, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Otherwise, there'll be links to Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff and anything else that you've got going on at the time. I'll make sure I include it there. Ken, thanks again for being part of Monster Kid Radio. Really appreciate it.
Man, I'm over the moon to be part of the Monster Kid Radio extended cast.
The extended universe, the shared...
The extended podcast universe. I'm just the Mimi. I just show up, uncredited.
Sounds good.
To deliver Serbian prophecy or nihilist philosophy on command.
All while wearing an awesome Hawaiian shirt. There we go.
All right. There we go.
Well, if you haven't gotten your fill of Ken Hite just yet, head over to KenandRobinTalkAboutStuff.com. That is the home of the Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff podcast. And you can listen to Ken and Robin Laws talk about, well, stuff. Go check them out. Let them know that you heard Ken here on Monster Kid Radio. Ken, thank you for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. The Seventh Victim, man, it is one that I am thinking about. I've been thinking about it for a while after I saw the film and then we talked about it. It's still something that I'm thinking about. It's one of those films that is going to stick with me for a very, very long time. Ken, thanks for bringing it to my attention and thanks for being part of Monster Kid Radio in 2020.
The fear of the year is here. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde, a monster he could not control, had taken over his very soul. A screaming demon rages inside, turning him into Mr. Hyde, an unstoppable black Superman. Super strong, supernatural, and super bad. His punch can topple a skyscraper. His kick can split the earth in two. More destructive than an earthquake. Mightier than a tidal wave. A one-man disaster area. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. When you're seeing what ain't, you're looking at a haint. Shot full of lead and he still ain't dead. Jump back, Jack, for your skull is cracked. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. Starring Bernie Casey, Rosalind Cash, Stu Gillum. Directed by William Blackula Crane. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. Rated R. Under 17. Not admitted without parents. So bring your mama. She'll like it too.
Welcome to Planet 8. Every 2 weeks, the crew at Planet 8 Podcast explores the many worlds of science fiction, fantasy, superheroes, monsters, and more.
We cover the latest movies and TV shows, as well as old favorites, too.
Yeah, like Planet of the Apes.
It's a madhouse! A madhouse!
Hey guys, don't forget Star Trek. Fascinating.
Or classic monsters like King Kong, Creature from the Black Lagoon, or Godzilla.
If it's nerdy or geeky, we'll probably be talking about it.
So why don't you tune in and check us out?
You can find us on iTunes or other fine podcast providers.
Come join the conversation at our website, planet8podcast.blogspot.com.
You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook.
This is Planet 8 Podcast. Signing off. End transmission.
Vampires, werewolves, zombies.
Yes, these things are real, but fortunately for those of us who can afford him, so is Mark Temple.
And he's good. Real good. He's a former FBI agent turned freelancer with the knowledge and skills to eliminate your monster problems. And his rates are negotiable.
Monster Hunter for Hire, the first volume of the Supernatural Solutions, the Mark Temple Case Files, is now available in both ebook and paperback. Go to tinyurl.com/monsterhuntertemple to buy your copy of Derek M. Cook's latest book.
Read about Mark Temple, the experienced professional now available to rid you of your supernatural, ghoulish, and monstrous pests.
That's tinyurl.com/monsterhuntertemple.
And don't worry, Mark Temple is discreet.
So that brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being part of the audience and for retweeting tweets and sharing the posts on Facebook and basically just spreading the word. If you want to know anything else about Monster Kid Radio, you can find me at monsterkidradio.net, where you're going to find links to everything that we talked about in this episode, in the show notes, up to and including the link to the podcast, The Secret History of Hollywood. This is the podcast that I mentioned to Ken that recently, I believe, concluded its run about Val Lewton. Get in there and subscribe and download the episodes now, because he does not leave the episodes online indefinitely. He does pull them down. And then after that, the only way to listen to the old podcast is to pick them up through Audible or some other method. So get in there now, download those episodes. You won't be sorry. They are really, really good. Adam, the man behind the podcast, does a great job with what he's doing. It's kind of embarrassing because it is so good, which makes what I do pale in comparison. The man is the man. So go check that out. That is over at attaboyclarence.com. That is the home of The Secret History of Hollywood, as well as the Attaboy Clarence podcast and the Talking Pictures TV podcast. I already mentioned Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff. That podcast, that link is in the show notes. I'll also make sure there are Amazon affiliate links to Ken's projects and products available through Amazon. If you want to pick up any Ken Hite material, literature, books, gaming material, whatever, please consider picking it up through the Amazon link, because we, as an affiliate, do get a little bit of scratch back from Jeff Bezos, and it helps keep the podcast going, as does your support over on Patreon. Later this month, I'm going to be revamping the Monster Kid Radio Patreon. So if you want to be a patron of MKR or want to continue to be a patron of MKR, well, stay tuned. More information is coming. What's coming before that, though, is next week's episode, where we're going to talk about another classic film that does deal with the devil. Talking about the movie The Black Cat. Normally I would insert a trailer right here, but there is no surviving trailer, as far as I can tell, of the 1934 film The Black Cat. So I'm just going to tell you, it's awesome. I can't wait to talk about it next week with Scott Morris from the Disney Indiana podcast and the Plan 9x9 podcast. I actually recorded that conversation with Scott this morning, less than 24 hours ago. I discussed it with him, recorded it, and I can't wait to drop that into the feed next week. If you have any thoughts about The Black Cat or The Seventh Victim or any other movies that would fall within the Monster Kid Radio wheelhouse that would have that satanic or devil influence, I'd love to hear about it. Drop me a line at monsterkidradio@gmail.com or call and leave us a voicemail at 503-479-5657. That's 503-479-5M I'm excited for what the new year is going to bring to Monster Kid Radio and to you. If you have any monsterific plans or resolutions that you'd like to share with the other Monster Kid Radio listeners, well, send that in and we'll play it on a future episode. Until next week, remember that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported License. Professor Frenzy's Bedtime Story is copyright Jerry Green 2020, and the song Psycho Nude is copyright The Wood Surfers 2018. You can find it on the album Wood Surfers over at woodsurfersbrazil.bandcamp.com. There will be a link in the show notes. Check them out and let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name is Derek M. Cook. Talk to you everybody next week. Ciao.